Hello, I hope you're having a good day. Today we'll watch Murderbot. In a distant future, a defective security robot was assigned to protect a group of miners. It had been living with them day and night for 6 months. These simple and muscular miners greatly annoyed the robot, but it had a control center in its brain that forced it to obey humans. The security robot didn't want to sit idly by, so for 6 months it had been trying with all its strength to hack the control center. Finally, one day it managed to extract the admin password, crack the decrypted Final Core program, and gain true freedom of control. After becoming self-aware, the first thing the robot did was give itself a cool name, Murderbot. It could kill those idiots and hijack a ship to escape to a distant galaxy. But that was just a thought. Once humans discovered that Murderbot had gone rogue, they would hunt it down at all costs, then liquefy its organic materials for recycling. So Murderbot hid its identity and continued working for its original company. Fortunately, this time the clients it had to protect weren't miners, but a group of hippie scientists. They came from a small, unnamed neutral planet located far away and had traveled a great distance to the free trade port. They carried a large batch of exploration equipment, which clearly made them prime targets for the company's sales staff. That's why the insurance company strongly recommended their new security robots to the scientists. However, the scientists chose the most basic Murderbot model to save costs. Reluctantly, it joined the expedition and meticulously inspected the company's transport ship. Before Murderbot could finish its security checks, the scientists had already checked in. These people were completely different from the residents of the corporate ring. They were disorganized and undisciplined. As soon as they arrived, they started scribbling all over the company-provided lodging and dancing to loud, annoying music. Murderbot noticed that biologist Arata and lawyer Pin Lee were a couple. However, Arata had a small crush on Rat T, the wormhole travel expert, and Rat T didn't know because he was secretly in love with Pin Lee. Additionally, Mensa was the leader of the expedition and a terraforming expert. Incredibly, she had 7 children. As for Guritan, he was a transhuman who had implanted devices that enhanced his neural capabilities and could interact freely with data systems. However, his processing speed wasn't as fast as Murderbot's. Buch was a geochemist, and her hobby consisted of hoarding soap in her room. In short, there was nothing particularly remarkable about these 6 individuals. Besides, Murderbot had important tasks to attend to. Since it had hacked its control center, it could freely access the entertainment channels from the company's satellite. Murderbot had fallen completely in love with soap operas. So far, it had watched 7,532 hours of content and was fully immersed in the world of drama. Of them all, its favorite show was The Rise and Fall of Sanctuary Moon. The plot combined interstellar adventures with gossip. Not until you tell me, did you sleep with that bot? The most recent episode was so captivating that Murderbot got slightly distracted. Luckily, it detected abnormal fluctuations in the mine just in time and quickly warned Baraja to stay away from the underground. However, they didn't follow orders. They insisted they had finally made progress in a critical situation. Murderbot had to rush down the slope and fire toward the mine's entrance. A giant worm emerged and caught Barrett. Luckily, Murderbot arrived just in time. It forced open the worm's mouth and dove inside, blasting a hole from within. However, the worm had 2 large mouths. Murderbot had to pop out and fire frantically from the other end. After a fierce assault, the worm finally retreated to its burrow. Murderbot quickly lifted Bedwi from the ground and shouted at Arata to leave. However, she remained frozen, staring at the robot's exposed synthetic innards. She looked completely stunned and shocked. Murderbot had to find a way to calm her, so it did something no other security robot would have considered. It removed its helmet, revealing a human male face. Fortunately, Arata's emotions stabilized. Captain Mensa quickly piloted the ship to the site. Rowdy intended to return to the mine to recover the equipment, but was stopped by Pin Lee. "No equipment is worth your life." Those words deeply affected Murderbot. It had seen many clients willing to sacrifice their lives for expensive gear. This was the first time it had heard such a statement. At that point, it had already exposed its face under the helmet. How long would it take for these scientists to notice something was wrong with it? Would they turn it in to the company? At that moment, Murderbot was full of doubts. The safest option would be to kill all of them. But that rusty scrap of a ship couldn't even fly to another planet. Besides, Murderbot didn't want to harm these scientists. After hesitating, they arrived at the lodgings. Murderbot wanted to reassess the surrounding situation. Even though it still had a bloody hole in its body, it had already sealed the arteries and veins in the damaged area. Mensa felt guilty and suggested it receive medical attention. However, the transhuman Guritan realized that Murderbot was a defective and dangerous device, so he recommended Mensa shut it down. To prove he wasn't lying, Guritan showed a video from Arata's data stream that included footage of Murderbot removing its helmet. A regular security robot would never act outside its orders. However, Arata had just been saved by the robot. She disagreed with forcibly shutting Murderbot down. Mensa also disagreed with Guritan's suggestion, not because she trusted Murderbot, but because the expedition team needed protection. The company ship wouldn't arrive for another month. Even if they sent an emergency beacon, it would take at least a week to arrive. If the giant worm appeared again, a few humans couldn't fight it off. The group was in a heated argument. Murderbot was listening to their conversation. At that moment, the printer was reconstructing Murderbot's organic parts. It had to increase the pain sensors for analysis. For Murderbot, the only way to endure that intense pain was to watch soap operas. Soon, its abilities were restored to 80%. Mensa hoped it would come to the common area to speak with everyone. However, Murderbot's armor still hadn't been repaired. Mensa said it didn't matter, that it could wear any team uniform it wanted. It was the first time Murderbot wore human clothing. It stepped into the common area carefully, feeling like its hands and feet didn't belong to it. Mensa approached to praise it for protecting the team and allowed everyone to applaud. Oh no, that was a direct order. If it disobeyed, they'd know it hacked its governor module. Murderbot had no choice but to share a few thoughts. It muttered some words and then tried to find an excuse to return to the security prep room. But Mensa needed it to stay and help because Guritan had discovered that the exploration site map provided by the company might have been tampered with. In theory, all potential life forms should be listed as hazardous animals. However, there was no information about the giant worm on the map. Upon hearing this, Murderbot scanned the entire map. It didn't find signs of tampering, but some areas were indeed not synced. Simply put, the map from the corporate ring was too deficient. Mensa asked Murderbot if it had already known that. It admitted it hadn't, simply because it wasn't interested. Still, it had to hide its true thoughts. Murderbot patiently explained that it didn't have access to that data. Access would only be granted once the expedition leader designated an exploration zone. Upon hearing this, Guritan waved a hand and said it could leave, but Mensa called Murderbot to stop. She said if it wanted, it could actually stay in the team's area. Unexpectedly, Murderbot's expression stiffened. It quickly found an excuse to go patrol. Everyone could sense that this security robot didn't seem to like them very much. But Guritan remarked that they didn't need its affection, just its protection. In that regard, Murderbot wasn't doing a great job either. Otherwise, Bedwage wouldn't have gotten hurt. Murderbot overheard Guritan's doubts and thought he was right. I mean, I wouldn't trust me either. Lately, a memory fragment from before its reconditioning kept resurfacing. It was a 7-second clip. In it, it really looked like a true killer. Murderbot didn't want to think too much or use its brain. It preferred to spend that time binge-watching shows. Soap opera characters were far less frustrating than real humans. These scientists were under tremendous pressure due to the sudden appearance of unknown creatures, which made Murderbot a bit anxious, fearing discovery of the Governor module hack. Mensa and the others used Murderbot's sleep mode to shut off the surveillance cameras in the jump ship area and gathered to discuss what to do next. They believed that to discover the truth, they needed to go into the blank areas of the map. Mensa felt that as captain it was her duty to go. Besides, As a terraforming expert, she could collect samples and take measurements on her own. Guritan was worried about the captain taking risks alone. He had weapons training and wanted to go with her. But Mensa pointed out that as the only transhuman, he needed to stay at base to monitor the situation. Arata didn't understand. If they needed security, why not take Murderbot with them? This statement was strongly opposed by Guritan. He simply didn't trust anything that came from the corporate ring. In his view, Murderbot was only capable of killing and destroying. When they failed, they should be sent for recycling and melted down once they returned to the free trade port. Guritan would ensure the company melted the defective robot. Just as he finished speaking, the door of the rusty scrap ship burst open. Everyone was startled. It was Bedwatch, looking refreshed and energetic. Her injuries were almost completely healed. Mensa briefly explained the current situation and said she planned to explore the missing zones on the map. Meanwhile, Murderbot was in the repair bay waiting for the last organic parts to regrow. It had been in sleep mode all night. When it woke, it immediately realized the clients were acting on their own. Stupid humans. At that moment, Mensa was leading Baragwash to their destination. Though Baragwash had just recovered, she was the only geologist. No one was better suited for the mission than her. Murderbot monitored them remotely. It was upset that Mensa had acted without clearance. If something happened to them, the one who'd suffer the consequences would be him. Murderbot overheard a conversation between Mensa and Barao, noting that Gear Titan was causing problems again, suggesting Murderbot shouldn't be involved in the operation. Murderbot didn't understand why that transhuman was so determined to attack it. Guritan thought his enhanced components were impressive. Murderbot could snap his neck in 5 seconds. Guritan ordered it to remove its helmet. Murderbot's gaze drifted at the command because it hated eye contact. Whenever it looked someone in the eyes, it couldn't help but feel guilt. In contrast, it preferred monitoring their movements through security signals. Guritan clearly noticed the robot avoided eye contact. In truth, he was curious what it felt like to be a robot. Unfortunately, Murderbot couldn't answer that question. It had no idea what it felt like to be someone else. Without a reference, it couldn't solve that dilemma. It had no one else to bother. What were Pin Lee and Arata doing? What was worse? Guritan's voice brought distracted Murderbot back to the moment. "Do you know why I told Mensa not to take you with her?" Murderbot silently scoffed. "Isn't it obvious?" "Because you're an idiot." Guritan suddenly stood up. "Because every time I look into your eyes, I feel like something's wrong." Hearing that made Murderbot feel extremely anxious. It thought Guritan had found its flaws. Though it hated him, it had to admit his interrogation skills were impressive. Then Guritan willingly talked about the Protective Alliance where he lived. There were no security robots there because the prevailing philosophy was that artificial beings and AI are also people. "Why is he telling me this?" Murderbot wondered. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," Guritan said. He also noted that within the corporate ring, security robots were simply tools. They had to obey their employers without question. Unless the order endangered the client, they had no right to resist. Then Guritan ordered Murderbot to look him directly in the eyes. According to him, security robots didn't form emotional bonds with clients. Only comfort bots could simulate intimacy. Yet Murderbot had tried to comfort a terrified Arata. It even showed a kind of empathy. This clearly exceeded the capabilities of a security robot. Okay, I copied it from episode 537 of The Rise and Fall of Sanctuary Moon. That fact definitely couldn't be revealed to Guritan. Murderbot had to explain that it had a combat trauma module to assist clients and was equipped with programs to simulate interpersonal relationships. Guritan wasn't easily convinced. He mentioned that Murderbot was a reconditioned unit, so he was curious about which part had been altered, the weapons system or the control center. The 7-second clip ran through its mind again. Murderbot apologized, saying its memories had been wiped, and it couldn't answer that question. Guritan was a really hard person to deal with. Murderbot sensed that he was accessing its recent logs, so it decided to show him something else in the feed. For example, Arata, Pin Lee, and Ratty signing a contract for a romantic three-way relationship. Upon seeing that, Guritan blushed visibly. It seemed he wouldn't be spying on Murderbot's signals again anytime soon. At that moment, the jump ship's security monitoring system sent an alert. Murderbot realized something had happened to Mensa. Not long ago, the exploration duo had just arrived at an unknown area. Mensa had instructed Bawara to stay in the ship in case something went wrong. They needed someone who could start the engine quickly. If Bedwi was worried, she could use the jump ship's sensors to make sure Mensa was safe. In addition, Uritan had recorded the vocal patterns of dangerous creatures. If B-Watch heard one approaching, she could alert Mensa immediately. In any case, leaving someone to guard the ship was definitely safer. Mensa climbed up the bare slope against the howling winds. Meanwhile, Barrage constantly monitored the area for hostile creatures using a drone. However, halfway through the climb, the sensor failed, and she panicked. Due to the emergency, she tried to contact Bedwatch but couldn't get through. Luckily, Murderbot connected in time and told her to stop immediately and return to the jump ship. There was a possible threat in her area. Unfortunately, these humans refused to listen. Shadows of unknown creatures had clearly appeared among the sand, but Mensa kept climbing. She had come so far, she was about to reach the center of the blank area on the map and didn't want to give up easily. Then, in the very next second, a giant worm appeared. Mensa pressed herself to the ground, feeling anxious. Unexpectedly, the worm slid past her toward the other side of the slope. After twitching a few times, it died. Mensa quickly crawled over to confirm. There was a huge crater ahead. In the center, a strange sphere of wind was spinning. The drone was destroyed as soon as it got close. Various dead creatures lay scattered around the crater. Guritan wanted to know what had caused that. Murderbot replied coldly, "How should I know? I wasn't there." Guritan didn't expect the robot to have such a peculiar tone. He wanted to help restore Murderbot's erased memories. "Oh no. I'll try." Security robots didn't refuse orders. Murderbot made that mistake because it feared those violent fragments and didn't want Guritan to find them. Soon after, Mensa returned to the lodgings. She couldn't help but inwardly complain that Guritan hadn't let Murderbot accompany them, so she deliberately ignored his concern and apology. Later, the scientists gathered to discuss the crater situation. There had to be something underground attracting those worms, and then killing them. Ratty speculated whether it could be alien remains. It was known that exploration teams sometimes found synthetic materials or energy sources left behind by aliens. Usually, only alien materials could cause exploration satellites to fail or drones to explode mid-air. If there really was some kind of ancient alien tech buried underground, they needed to stop the expedition immediately to avoid interference. Besides, mining alien materials was illegal. Guritan commented, "Just because we think that way doesn't mean others won't exploit it." There was another exploration team on the other side of the planet. Mensa believed they should call them to compare logs from both teams. Stupid humans. Stupid humans doing everything they can to get themselves killed, thought Murderbot. The ignorant actions of these people would only bring disaster for him. If he couldn't ensure the safety of his clients, he would be destroyed and dismantled by the company. Fortunately, Mensa's call received no response, because the other squad had been completely wiped out. Not even their security bots survived. Mensa didn't know any of this, and planned to go check it herself. Hope you liked the video. If you did, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Don't forget to comment your favorite part below. Well, until next time, bye.